Sergeant Nigel Coleman parked his Ford police car outside a two-story house on Chicago's South Side at exactly 6:47 p.m. It was the same house he had bought 18 years ago when he first joined the police force. At that time, the neighborhood was not as prestigious, but over the years, Nigel had managed to turn his modest home into a real family haven with a well-kept lawn and a white picket fence. "Dad's home," came the voice of 14-year-old Kevin from the living room, where the boy was doing his homework. Nigel smiled as he took off his uniform jacket. This daily ritual was his anchor of normality after long shifts on the city streets. Monica emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands with a dish towel. At 38, she looked almost the same as she did on their wedding day. Slim, with short brown hair and a warm smile that always calmed Nigel after a difficult day. "How was your day?" she asked, approaching him for the traditional kiss on the cheek. "The usual. A couple of arrests, a lot of paperwork," Nigel replied, but Monica noticed a subtle tension in his voice. In 20 years of marriage, she had learned to read his mood from the smallest details. The Coleman family was known in their St. Patrick's Church community as a model of Christian values. Every Sunday, they occupied the same spot in the third row, where Nigel, dressed in a formal suit, sat next to his wife and children. Monica led the youth ministry, and Nigel sometimes spoke to the congregation about the importance of law and order in society. Their eldest daughter, Emily, who was 16, attended a prestigious Catholic school and dreamed of attending law school. Kevin was passionate about baseball and played on the school team. From the outside, it seemed that the Colemans had everything an American middle-class family could dream of. But behind closed doors, Nigel was struggling with demons that no one knew about. In recent months, he had become withdrawn, often staying late at the station, citing overtime work. Monica attributed this to stress. Being a police officer in Chicago was indeed becoming increasingly difficult. "Tom called today," Monica said as she served dinner. Lieutenant Tom Whitman was not only Nigel's boss, but also a family friend. Their families often spent weekends together, barbecuing or going to Cubs baseball games. What did he want? Nigel sat down at the table, avoiding his wife's gaze. "He reminded you about the barbecue at their house on Saturday. He said the whole team from the station would be there. You remember, right?" Nigel nodded, but his thoughts were far away. He was thinking about the events of the past few weeks that had radically changed his perception of himself. 18 years of police service had taught him to control his emotions, but what was going on in his head and heart was beyond his control. At the station, he was known as a reliable colleague and an exemplary family man. Nigel never participated in the men's conversations about women, never went to strip clubs with his colleagues after his shift. Everyone attributed this to his religiosity and devotion to his family. If only they knew the truth. "Nigel, are you listening to me?" Monica's voice brought him back to reality. "Sorry, I was thinking about work." "What were you saying?" "I was asking about your new partner. Officer Rodriguez, I think? Tom said you're taking him under your wing." Nigel tensed. "Yes, he's a young guy. I need to show him how to work with people on the street." It was a half-truth. Officer Rodriguez was indeed a rookie, but Nigel had requested to be paired with him for other reasons. His young colleague was openly gay, and although there was no official discrimination in the department, the unofficial atmosphere remained hostile. Nigel felt an inexplicable need to protect Rodriguez, although he couldn't explain why. At dinner, Emily talked about her preparations for prom, and Kevin complained about his strict baseball coach. Monica listened to the children with pleasure, glancing at her husband from time to time. Something about his behavior bothered her, but she couldn't figure out what it was. After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms, Monica approached Nigel, who was standing by the living room window, looking out at the empty street. "Honey, maybe we should talk. You seem kind of distant lately." Nigel turned to his wife. He saw genuine concern in her eyes, and it made him feel even worse. Monica was a good wife and a devoted mother. She deserved honesty, but the truth could destroy everything they had built together. Just a lot of work. Crime is on the rise in the city, and we have fewer and fewer resources, he said, touching her hand. Monica nodded, but deep down she felt that the problem was deeper. She knew Nigel well enough to understand that his work had never weighed on him like this before. Something had changed, and that change frightened her. In the bedroom that night, Nigel lay awake for a long time, listening to his wife's steady breathing beside him. He thought about his life, about the choices that had led him here. Marrying Monica had been a natural step. She was the daughter of a respected church leader, a beautiful and intelligent woman. Their wedding had been an event for the whole community. But even then, 20 years ago, somewhere deep down, Nigel knew that something was wrong. He loved Monica, but it was the love of a friend, a protector, a life partner. He did not have the passion he saw in the eyes of other men when they looked at their wives. He attributed this to his reserved nature. Recent events had forced him to acknowledge a truth he had suppressed his entire adult life. And that truth threatened to destroy not only his career, but also the family he sincerely loved, even if not as he should have. The next morning, Nigel got up at 5:30, as usual. He showered, shaved, and put on his uniform with the same meticulousness he had for the past 18 years. In the mirror, he saw a middle-aged man with gray eyes and graying stubble. Outwardly, he looked like a typical Chicago police officer, strong, confident, reliable. No one could have guessed the storm raging inside. At breakfast, the family discussed their plans for the day. Monica was going to a parent committee meeting at school, Emily was preparing for a chemistry test, and Kevin was looking forward to practice. "I'll be late today," Nigel said, finishing his coffee. "Overtime again?" Monica asked. "I have to finish the reports on yesterday's arrests." That was a lie. Nigel was planning to visit Marcus in prison. Officially, it was for further questioning about the theft case. Unofficially, he wasn't entirely sure of his motives himself. Leaving the house, Nigel glanced back at the windows behind which his family was getting ready for the new day. Monica was helping Kevin pack his gym bag, and Emily was coming down the stairs with her textbooks in her hands. It was a picture of a perfect family morning. But even this picture couldn't drown out the voice in his head, which was getting louder every day. The voice that told him that his whole life was built on lies, and that sooner or later the truth would come out. At the station, Nigel's colleagues greeted him as usual. He was a respected sergeant who never let his team down. His impeccable reputation and dedication to the service made him one of the most valuable employees in the unit. "Coleman, do you have an interview today in the Jones case?" Lieutenant Whitman asked as he passed his desk. "Yes, sir. I want to clarify some details." Whitman nodded. "Good work yesterday. The guy confessed right away when you talked to him. You have a knack for getting through to criminals. If Whitman only knew what kind of approach Nigel had taken with Marcus Jones." The rest of the morning was spent on routine work, reports, phone calls, preparing for the interrogation. But Nigel's thoughts kept returning to his encounter with Marcus, to the moment their eyes met in the holding cell, to the feeling he had never experienced before in his life. At noon, Nigel headed to the county jail. Officially, it was for work. Unofficially, to face the truth about himself that he could no longer deny. Marcus Jones stood in front of a jewelry store window on Michigan Avenue at 2:30 a.m., studying the alarm system. 28 years of his life had led him to this moment, when theft seemed to be the only way out of debt. Heroin was eating up all his money, and dealers didn't take promises. Golden Time Jewelry was a small family business that had been operating in the neighborhood for 30 years. Marcus chose it for a reason. It had an old security system, and the night police patrol usually only passed through this block once an hour. Breaking the glass with a brick wrapped in his jacket, Marcus quickly got inside. The alarm went off, but he had at least 5 minutes before security arrived. With trembling hands, he grabbed gold chains and bracelets from the display case and stuffed them into his backpack. But Marcus didn't take one thing into account. Sergeant Coleman's patrol car was only 2 blocks away when the alarm went off. Nigel and his partner, Officer Rodriguez, arrived on the scene 3 minutes later. Marcus was still inside the store, desperately trying to break open the cash register. "Chicago police! Come out with your hands up!" Nigel shouted, shining his flashlight into the store. Marcus froze. In the light of the flashlight, Nigel saw a young man of thin build with tousled dark hair and frightened eyes. He was wearing a worn denim jacket and old sneakers, the classic portrait of a desperate drug addict. "Don't shoot! I give up!" Marcus slowly raised his hands as he came out from behind the counter. Nigel entered the store with his gun at the ready, but something about this man made him loosen his grip. Perhaps it was the obvious helplessness in Marcus's eyes, or the way he was shaking, not from the cold, but from withdrawal. "On your knees, hands behind your head," Nigel commanded as he approached him. When Marcus knelt down, their eyes met. At that moment, something happened, an electric discharge of mutual recognition that lasted only a second, but changed everything. Nigel felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced before. "Sergeant?" Rodriguez called from the doorway. "Everything okay?" Nigel shook himself, returning to reality. "Yes, everything's under control. Call a patrol car for transport." As he cuffed Marcus, Nigel couldn't help but notice the softness of his skin and the faint scent of cheap cologne mixed with sweat and fear. Marcus's hands were surprisingly delicate for a construction worker. "What's your name?" Nigel asked, more quietly than protocol required. "Marcus Jones," he replied, without looking up. "How old are you?" 28. At the station, Nigel personally took charge of processing Marcus's arrest. Usually, such cases were handed over to the sergeants on duty, but he told Whitman that he wanted to see it through to the end. During the initial interrogation, Marcus was depressed and cooperative. He confessed to the theft, explaining that he desperately needed money because of debts to drug dealers. The story was typical for Chicago. A young man from a disadvantaged neighborhood who lost his construction job and turned to drugs. "I have a mother," Marcus said during the interrogation. "She works as a cleaner in a hospital. She doesn't know about the drugs. If she finds out, it will kill her." Nigel listened and took notes, but it was Marcus's intonation rather than his words that caught his attention. His voice conveyed not only the pain of withdrawal, but also the deep sadness of a man who had lost faith in himself. "Why this particular store?" Nigel asked. "It seemed like an easy target. I didn't want to scare anyone or hurt anyone. I just needed the money." Something in Marcus's sincerity touched Nigel. He had seen many criminals over the years, but this one was different. He wasn't angry or aggressive, just broken. After the interrogation, Nigel escorted Marcus to the holding cell. As they walked down the hallway, Marcus suddenly stopped. "Sergeant, can I ask you a question?" Nigel nodded. "Do you believe that people can change? That it's possible to climb out of the hole you've dug for yourself?" The question caught Nigel off guard. Usually, those arrested either remained silent, made excuses, or threatened him. But Marcus asked a question that had been tormenting Nigel himself for the past few months. "I think everyone deserves a second chance," he replied slowly, "but only if they really want to change." Marcus looked at him gratefully. "Thank you for treating me like a human being." In his cell, Marcus sat down on the hard cot and covered his face with his hands. The withdrawal symptoms were getting worse, but worse than the physical pain was the thought that he had once again let down everyone who believed in him. Nigel lingered outside the cell longer than he should have. He watched Marcus struggle with the pain and felt an unexpected desire to help. It was irrational. A criminal is a criminal, and a cop is a cop. But something about Marcus awakened feelings in Nigel that he couldn't explain. The next day, Nigel came to see Marcus again under the pretext of asking additional questions about the case. In reality, there were no questions. The case was straightforward. A confession had been obtained, and evidence had been gathered. "How are you feeling?" Nigel asked, which was completely against protocol. "Better. The worst is over." Marcus looked up. "Thanks for bringing me the aspirin yesterday." Nigel had indeed asked the prison doctor to give Marcus painkillers. Officially, it was for humanitarian reasons. Unofficially, it was because he couldn't bear to see him suffer. "Tell me about yourself," Nigel said, sitting down on a chair opposite the camera. "Before the drugs, what were you like?" This was also against protocol, but Marcus began to talk. About his childhood in South Chicago, about his dreams of becoming an architect, about how his father's death in a car accident destroyed those plans, about working on a construction site to support his mother, about the first dose of heroin that was supposed to numb the pain of loss. Nigel listened, recognizing echoes of his own struggle with identity in Marcus's story. Different circumstances, but the same attempt to numb internal conflict with external means. "Do you have a family, Sergeant?" Marcus asked. "A wife, 2 kids," Nigel replied automatically. "Lucky you. It must be nice to know who you really are." Those words hit Nigel like a physical blow. Marcus couldn't have known about his inner struggle, but his remark hit the mark. Over the next 3 days, Nigel found reasons to visit Marcus. He brought books from the station library and delivered messages from his mother, who had finally learned of his arrest. Gradually, a bond developed between them that went far beyond the relationship between a police officer and a prisoner. Marcus turned out to be an intelligent and well-read man who could hold a conversation about literature, history, and philosophy. Nigel realized that he missed these conversations when he was off duty. "Why are you so nice to me?" Marcus asked during one of these visits. Nigel was silent for a long time, searching for the right words. "I don't know," he finally replied. "Perhaps because I see you as more than just a criminal." "Who do you see?" "A man who has lost his way, just like me." This admission hung in the air between them. Marcus looked closely at Nigel, and understanding appeared in his eyes. "Sergeant," he began quietly. Nigel interrupted him. "You can call me Nigel." It was a violation of all the rules, but at that moment, the rules seemed less important than the human connection he felt for the first time in his life. On the 5th day, when Nigel came for another visit, Marcus was sitting on his cot reading a book of poetry that the police officer had brought him. "Langston Hughes," Marcus said, showing him the cover. "I didn't know you liked poetry." "My daughter is studying him in school." "I decided to read it," Nigel lied. In fact, he had chosen the book because he remembered Marcus mentioning African American literature. Marcus began to read aloud one of the poems about dreams that are put off and dry up in the sun. His voice was soft, with a slight hoarseness, and Nigel found himself captivated not only by the words, but also by the way they sounded when Marcus recited them. "Beautiful," Nigel said when the reading was over. "Sad," Marcus corrected, "but true. Dreams really can wither if you don't water them." "What dreams did you have?" Marcus talked about his desire to design houses, to create spaces where people would feel safe and happy. About the drawings he made as a teenager, imagining how he would change the architecture of his neighborhood. "What about you?" Marcus asked. "What did you dream of when you were young?" Nigel thought for a moment. He had played the role of the model police officer and family man for so long that he had almost forgotten his true desires. "I wanted to be a history teacher," he admitted. "I thought I could help children understand the world. But my father insisted on the police. He said it was a real man's job." "And do you regret it?" "Sometimes." Nigel was completely honest for the first time in many years. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had chosen differently." A silence filled with understanding settled between them. 2 men, each of whom had not followed their own path, each of whom had hidden their true nature. "Nigel," Marcus said quietly, "can I ask you a personal question?" Nigel nodded, though his heart beat faster. "Are you happy in your marriage?" The question hung in the air like a time bomb. Nigel knew he should say yes, as he always had. But in Marcus's presence, lying was difficult. "My wife is a good woman," he said cautiously. "She deserves a better husband." "That's not answering my question." Nigel looked into Marcus's eyes and saw an understanding he had never seen before. It was as if this man could see right through him, see the struggle he fought with himself every day. "No," Nigel whispered. "I'm not happy. And I don't know how to be." Marcus reached out his hand toward the bars, and Nigel, as if hypnotized, moved closer. Their fingers almost touched through the metal bars. "Me neither," Marcus said. "I've been pretending to be someone else my whole life. First, I tried to be the son my father wanted me to be. Then, I tried to be the guy my friends expected me to be. And then, I started using drugs so I wouldn't feel anything at all. And now? Now I don't know who I am. But I know I don't want to lie to myself anymore." Footsteps sounded in the corridor. The shift was ending, and the new guard was making his rounds. Nigel quickly stepped back from the bars. "I have to go," he said. "Nigel," Marcus called after him as the police officer headed for the exit. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." On the way home, Nigel couldn't get their conversation out of his head. For the first time in many years, he felt that someone saw him for who he really was, not as a husband, father, or police officer, but as himself. And it was both frightening and liberating. At home, Monica greeted him with a worried look. "You're late again." "It's becoming a habit." "It was a difficult case," Nigel replied, avoiding her eyes. "I had to finish the interrogation." Monica studied her husband's face. In 20 years of marriage, she had learned to read him like an open book, but now she felt as if the pages were closed to her. "Nigel, can we talk?" "Really talk?" "About what?" "About what's going on with you. You've changed. You've become distant." Nigel sat down next to his wife on the sofa, feeling the weight of guilt. He loved Monica, but he realized that he had been deceiving her for many years without even realizing it. "I'm just rethinking some things," he said. "Work makes you think about life." "What things?" Nigel couldn't answer that question without destroying their world. So he hugged his wife and said what was expected of him. "Nothing important. Everything will be fine." But they both knew that wasn't true. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus Jones' arrest, and Nigel continued to find reasons to visit the county jail. Officially, he was working with Marcus as an informant on other drug cases in the area. Lieutenant Whitman even praised him for his initiative. "It's rare to see a sergeant work so closely with a petty thief," Whitman remarked on Friday morning. "But if he can give us information about the suppliers, it's worth it." Nigel nodded, feeling the lie burn his throat. Marcus didn't give any information about drug dealers, nor could he. His connections in the criminal world were limited to buying heroin for personal use. That evening, Monica found her husband at the kitchen table, staring into space with an unfinished cup of coffee in his hands. "Nigel, dinner's been ready for half an hour," she said, trying to hide the irritation in her voice. "Sorry, I was thinking about work," he snapped out of it, noticing that the children were already sitting at the table. "What work?" "Tom told me at church today that most of your cases are closed. He said you're spending a lot of time with some arrested guy." Nigel felt the muscles in his neck tense. "Tom shouldn't discuss my work with civilians." "Civilians?" Monica raised an eyebrow. "I'm your wife, Nigel. And his friend's wife. He's worried about you. So am I." At dinner, Emily talked about her plans for graduation, but Nigel was barely listening. His thoughts were with Marcus, who was now eating prison food in his cell. Yesterday, Marcus had told him about his past attempts to quit drugs, about how hard it had been to admit his sexual orientation to himself in a conservative family. My mother still thinks I just didn't have time for girls because of my work, Marcus said with a sad smile. It was easier to let her think that than to break her heart with the truth. Nigel understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. Have you ever told anyone the truth? Nigel asked. Nigel, I tried. When I was 23, I fell in love with a guy from college. I thought I was ready to come out, but when I told my best friend, he stopped talking to me. He said I was a pervert. And what did you do? I turned to drugs. I decided it was better to feel nothing than to feel the wrong thing. Nigel nodded, recognizing echoes of his own struggle in this story. Only he didn't escape into drugs, but into an ideal family life. After dinner, Monica took Nigel to the bedroom under the pretext of discussing the family budget. Nigel, we need to have a serious talk, she said, closing the door. About what? About what's going on between us. You're avoiding me. When was the last time we really talked? When was the last time we touched each other? Nigel realized he couldn't remember. The last few weeks had been like living in a parallel reality, where the only bright spots were his meetings with Marcus. I'm not avoiding you, he protested weakly. You are. And I want to know why. Is there another woman? The question caught Nigel off guard with its directness. Monica had always been tactful, avoiding confrontation, but now there was steel in her voice. No, he replied, and it was true. There was no other woman. Then what? Problems at work? Health? Money? Nigel sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the lie pressing down on his shoulders. He wanted to tell Monica the truth, but how could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? I'm going through a difficult period, he said finally. I'm rethinking a lot of things. What things, Nigel? Us? Our family? No, not you. Myself. Monica sat down next to him and took his hand. Then help me understand. We're a team, remember? We promised each other we'd share everything. Nigel looked at his wife, the woman who had given him children, who had supported his career, who had been the perfect life partner. And he realized that he couldn't destroy her world with his doubts. It's just a midlife crisis, he said, forcing a smile. It'll pass. But Monica wasn't convinced. She knew her husband too well to believe such a simple explanation. The next day, Monica called the station and found out that Nigel had gone back to prison on official business. That evening, she decided to take action. Linda, this is Monica Coleman, she said into the phone to Lieutenant Whitman's wife. Can I ask you a strange question? Of course, dear. What is it? Has Tom said anything about Nigel's work lately? About any special cases? Not really. He just mentioned that Nigel spends a lot of time with some arrested guy. He's trying to recruit him as an informant, it seems. Tom even said he was proud of his dedication to his work. I see. Thank you. After the conversation, Monica sat in the living room for a long time, trying to understand what was bothering her so much. Nigel had always been a dedicated police officer, but he had never been obsessed with his work. What had changed? Meanwhile, in prison, Nigel and Marcus were spending more and more time talking, and their conversations were becoming increasingly personal. Marcus told him about his first kiss with a man at the age of 17, about his fear of being exposed, about years of self-hatred. Have you ever been with a man? Marcus asked during one of his visits. Nigel was silent for a long time. No, he finally replied, but I've thought about it. Dreamed about it, I guess, but I never acted on it. Why? Fear, family, career, church, society, take your pick. Marcus reached out to the bars, and this time Nigel didn't pull away. Their fingers touched through the metal bars, the first physical contact that made Nigel's heart beat like crazy. It's never too late to be yourself, Marcus said quietly. What if being yourself destroys other people's lives? What if not being yourself destroys your own? That question haunted Nigel all the way home. At home, he found Monica in their bedroom, sitting on the bed with her phone in her hands. "Who were you talking to?" he asked. "My mom." "I was telling her about the kids." Monica looked at him intently. "Where have you been all this time?" "Tom said you left the station at 6. Nigel realized he was being tested. "I stopped by the prison." Additional questioning. "About the same case? How long can you interrogate one person?" "It's hard to explain. Try." Nigel sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the walls of lies closing in around him. "This man, Marcus Jones, he can help us with more serious cases, but it takes time to gain his trust." "And how long will that take?" "I don't know." Monica lay down on the bed, turning away from her husband. "Nigel, if you have problems, tell me. Whatever it is, we'll get through it together." Nigel lay down next to her, but did not touch his wife. The gap between them was widening, and he did not know how to bridge it without destroying everything they had together. The next day, Monica decided to take the initiative. She drove to the police station and waited for Nigel's shift to end, hiding in her car across the street. When her husband left the building, she followed him. Nigel did indeed go to the county jail. Monica waited half an hour, then went inside, introducing herself as the wife of a police officer who wanted to deliver something to an inmate. "Which inmate, ma'am?" asked the officer on duty. "Marcus Jones. My husband, Sergeant Coleman, works with him." The guard checked the visitor log. "Yes, Sergeant Coleman does visit him frequently." Almost every day for the past 2 weeks, Monica's heart skipped a beat. Every day? Nigel had mentioned several interviews, but every day. "How long do these meetings usually last?" "An hour, sometimes more. Your husband is very dedicated to his work. We rarely see such thoroughness." Monica thanked the officer on duty and left, feeling the ground slip away from under her feet. An hour every day with one arrestee. This was not normal police work. In the car, she tried to find a rational explanation. Perhaps the case was really complicated. Perhaps this Marcus Jones was the key to uncovering a large criminal network. But an inner voice told her that something was wrong here. At home, Monica tried to behave as usual, but thoughts of her husband would not leave her alone. At dinner, she watched Nigel closely. He was distracted, answering the children's questions inappropriately, and several times she caught herself smiling at some thought of his. "Dad, are you listening to me?" Kevin repeated his question about permission to stay overnight at a friend's house. "What? Yes, of course. But talk to your mother first," Nigel replied, clearly not understanding what she was talking about. After dinner, Monica put the children to bed and then returned to the living room, where Nigel was sitting with his reports. "Tell me about this Marcus Jones," she said without preamble. Nigel froze, his pen suspended over the paper. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Why are you spending so much time with him? What information is he giving you? Why is this case so important to you? How do you know about the time?" "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that you're lying to me, and I want to know why." Nigel put down his pen and looked at his wife. In her eyes, he saw the pain and confusion his lies had caused her. "It's hard to explain," he said quietly. "Try. We have time." Nigel stood up and walked to the window. It was drizzling outside, and raindrops ran down the glass, distorting the streetlights. "Marcus isn't your typical criminal. He's a smart guy who got into trouble because of drugs. I think I can help him." "Help him how?" "That's not your job, Nigel. You're a police officer, not a social worker." "I know, but sometimes you meet someone who makes you rethink your views." Monica walked up behind her husband and put her hands on his shoulders. "Nigel, you're a good man. Your desire to help is to your credit. But I'm worried you're getting too emotionally involved." "Maybe," Nigel agreed, without turning around. "Isn't this man trying to use you? Manipulate you?" Nigel turned around sharply. "No, he's not like that. You don't know him." The sharpness of his reaction surprised them both. Monica stepped back, studying her husband's face. I'm sorry, Nigel said more softly. He's really trying to change, and I want to give him that chance. But Monica had already seen something she didn't like. The passion with which Nigel defended this Marcus was inappropriate for a professional relationship. The next day, while Nigel was at work, Monica went to the public library and found an article in the newspaper archives about Marcus Jones's arrest. The photo showed an attractive young man with dark hair and expressive eyes. In the photo, he looked confused and frightened. Monica studied the photo, trying to understand what had attracted her husband to this man. She read the article twice but found nothing unusual, just a standard story about a burglary committed by a drug addict. That evening, Nigel was late again. Monica went to bed alone but couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m, she heard the front door open. Nigel quietly climbed the stairs, trying not to wake the family. In the bedroom, he found Monica sitting on the bed with the lamp on. "Where were you?" she asked calmly. "At the station, finishing up reports. The station closes at midnight, Nigel." He realized he was caught. "Then I stopped by a 24-hour bar. I needed to think. What was there to think about in a bar at 2 a.m? Nigel sat down on the edge of the bed, still fully clothed. "About us. About what kind of husband I am. About whether you deserve better." "And what conclusion did you come to?" "That you do." Monica felt a chill in her stomach. "Nigel, do you want a divorce?" "No." The answer came too quickly, too desperately. "No, I don't want a divorce. I'm just confused." "Confused about what?" Nigel lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and closed his eyes. "About who I really am." Monica lay down beside him, studying her husband's profile in the dim light. "You're Nigel Coleman, my husband, the father of our children, a good police officer, a man of faith. What else is there to know? What if that's not enough? What if that's not who I am? Then who are you?" Nigel opened his eyes and looked at his wife. In her gaze, he saw love, concern, and growing fear. And he realized he couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. "I don't know," he whispered. "I honestly don't know." The next morning, Monica woke up alone. Nigel had already left for work without waking her. There was a note on the kitchen table. "Sorry about yesterday. I love you. N." But the words of love no longer comforted Monica. They sounded like a farewell. At the station, Nigel had trouble concentrating on his work. He counted the hours until he could see Marcus again. This dependence frightened him, but he couldn't fight it. "Coleman, a word!" Lieutenant Whitman called him over toward the end of his shift. In Whitman's office, Nigel tried to look normal, but his boss was studying his face closely. "Nigel, we've known each other for many years. You're like family to me," Whitman began. "So I'm saying this as a friend, not as a boss." "What do you mean, sir? This case with Jones?" "I understand you want to get as much information out of him as possible, but don't go too far." "What do you mean?" "I mean that sometimes criminals know how to play on the sympathy of police officers, especially ones like Jones, educated, articulate. Don't let him mess with your head." Nigel felt the blood rush to his face. "Sir, I have the situation under control." "I hope so, because Monica is worried. She called Linda and asked about your work. She's a good woman, Nigel. Don't make her suffer because you're overdoing it at work." "Understood, sir." Thursday, May 23rd. Monica finished work at school an hour early and decided to surprise her husband by dropping by the station with a home-cooked meal. But the secretary told her that Sergeant Coleman had gone to the jail on official business. Monica got in her car and drove to the county jail. She needed to see with her own eyes what was going on between her husband and this Marcus Jones. At the jail, she introduced herself as the police officer's wife and asked to be shown where the interrogations took place. The guard on duty, suspecting nothing, led her down the hallway to the meeting rooms. "Your husband is in the 3rd room," he said, "but it's best not to disturb him. He said it was an important interrogation." Monica nodded and waited for the guard to leave. Then she cautiously approached the door of room number 3. Through the small window, she saw something that changed her life forever. Nigel and Marcus were sitting on opposite sides of a metal table, but their hands were touching on top of it. Marcus was saying something, and Nigel was looking at him with an expression Monica hadn't seen on her husband's face in many years. It was tenderness, intimacy, love. Monica pressed herself against the wall, feeling her heart pound in her chest. She saw Nigel stroking Marcus's fingers, leaning closer when he spoke. This was not a relationship between a police officer and an informant. It was something much more personal. When Nigel got up to leave, Monica quickly moved away from the door and hid around the corner. She saw her husband leave the room with a look of happiness on his face, a look she hadn't seen at home in months. The drive home was a blur. Monica tried to find an innocent explanation for what she had seen, but the facts painted an irrefutable picture. The long meetings, the lies about working overtime, the emotional distance at home, it all pointed to one thing. At home, Monica paced around the house trying to decide what to do. The children came home from school, and she automatically helped them with their homework and made dinner, but her thoughts were far away. Nigel came home at the usual time, 6:45 p.m., but today there was a lightness in his gait that had been missing for several months. "Hi, honey," he said, kissing Monica on the cheek. She smelled a foreign scent on his clothes, the same cheap cologne she had smelled in the prison hallway. At dinner, Nigel was more talkative than usual. He asked the children about school, joked with Kevin about baseball, and asked about Emily's plans for the weekend. Monica watched him with growing horror, realizing that his good mood was not related to his family, but to the man in prison. After the children went to bed, Monica waited for Nigel to take a shower and checked the pockets of his uniform. In his breast pocket, she found a folded piece of paper with a poem written in handwriting that was clearly not Nigel's. The poem was about hidden love, about the fear of rejection, about the desire to be understood. At the end were the initials MD, Marcus Jones. Monica's hands trembled as she read the lines. It was a love letter. There was no doubt about it. When Nigel came out of the bathroom, Monica was standing in the middle of the bedroom with the piece of paper in her hands. "What's this?" she asked, holding out the poem to him. Nigel turned pale when he saw the paper. "Monica, I can explain." "Explain. Explain to me why my husband has a love poem from another man in his pocket." Nigel sat down on the bed, covering his face with his hands. The moment he had been dreading had finally arrived. "It's not what you think," he said weakly. "Then what is it?" "What is it, Nigel?" "It's hard to explain." "Try! Try to explain to me how my husband, the father of my children, could have an affair with a man, with a criminal." Monica's scream echoed through the bedroom. Nigel jumped up, closing the door. "Quiet! The children will hear. The children. Are you thinking about the children now? After what you've done?" Nigel turned to his wife, and in his eyes she saw not the shame she expected, but relief. Relief that the secret was out. "Monica, I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "But I can't pretend anymore." "Pretend what?" "That I'm someone I'm not. I tried to be a good husband, but what? But I can't love you the way you deserve to be loved. Because I like men." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Monica looked at her husband, trying to digest what she had heard. 20 years, she whispered. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, and you're telling me it was all a lie? Not a lie. I do love you, just not like that, not like that, Monica exploded. What do you mean, not like that? I'm your wife. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Monica. Monica walked over to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Her hands came across the cold metal of Nigel's service pistol, the second gun he kept at home. "Monica, what are you doing?" She turned to her husband with the gun in her hands. You destroyed our family. You turned our lives into a farce. Put the gun down. Please. No, you took everything from me. My husband, my family, my future. For some junkie. It's not his fault. It's mine. Of course it is. You chose him over us. Nigel slowly raised his hands, trying to calm his wife down. Monica, think about the children. They'll hear us. The children. What am I going to tell the children? That their father chose a criminal over his family? We can work this out. Talk it over. Find a solution. What solution? Divorce? Scandal? Shame on the whole family? Monica's voice was becoming increasingly hysterical. Do you know what they'll say at church? At the school where I work? What your colleagues will say? I don't care what they say. But I do. I'll have to live with the shame. The children will have to. Nigel took a step toward his wife. Monica, give me the gun. We'll talk calmly. Stay where you are, she shouted, pointing the gun at him. Don't come near me! Footsteps could be heard in the hallway. Emily had woken up. Mom, Dad, what's going on? Her daughter's voice came from behind the door. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Go back to sleep, Monica shouted, keeping her eyes on her husband. Monica, please. Nigel took another step. I said stop. The shot rang out at 11:47 p.m. Nigel fell to the bedroom floor, clutching his chest, which was oozing blood. His eyes were wide open in shock. Monica, he croaked. But Monica stood frozen, staring at the smoking gun in her hands. Something inside her broke the moment Nigel confessed his feelings for another man. Mom! What happened? Emily knocked on the bedroom door. Monica slowly lowered the gun. Nigel was no longer moving, his eyes staring at the ceiling. Blood spread across the white carpet they had chosen together 5 years ago. Mom, open the door! Monica walked over to the door and opened it. Emily and Kevin stood in the hallway in their pajamas, frightened and confused. Call 911, Monica said in a strangely calm voice. Tell them it was an accident. Emily peeked into the bedroom and saw her father on the floor in a pool of blood. Her scream echoed throughout the house. The first patrol car arrived 8 minutes later. Officers Jenkins and Park found a chaotic scene. Emily crying hysterically, Kevin frozen in shock, and Monica sitting in the living room calmly answering questions. What happened, ma'am? Officer Jenkins asked. Nigel was cleaning his gun, Monica replied in a thin voice. He was always very careful with his weapons, but today there was an accident. Officer Park examined the scene. Nigel was lying in the bedroom, the gun next to his body. The wound in his chest indicated that the shot had been fired at close range. Where were you when it happened? Jenkins continued his questioning. In the bathroom. I heard the shot, ran in and saw him on the floor. The story was plausible. Accidents with firearms happened even to experienced police officers, but something about Monica's behavior alarmed the officers. 20 minutes later, Detective Rita Vasquez arrived on the scene. A 45-year-old woman with 20 years of experience in the department, she specialized in homicide investigations and had a reputation as a meticulous and incorruptible investigator. What do we have? She asked Jenkins. Sergeant Nigel Coleman, 42 years old, 18 years of service, shot dead in his home around midnight. His wife claims it was an accident while cleaning his gun. Vasquez nodded and entered the house. The first thing she noticed was Monica Coleman's strange calmness. The woman had just lost her husband in tragic circumstances, but she was acting too reserved. Mrs. Coleman, I need to ask you a few questions, the detective said, sitting down across from her in the living room. Of course. Anything that will help us understand what happened. Tell me about your husband's mood lately. Was he depressed? Worried about anything? Monica thought for a moment. He was distant. He worked a lot. He said he had a difficult case. What kind of case? Something to do with an arrestee named Marcus Jones. Nigel spent a lot of time with him. Vasquez made a note in her notebook. The name Marcus Jones sounded familiar to her. Did your husband ever talk about suicide? About wanting to hurt himself? No, never. Nigel was a religious man. He considered suicide a sin. In the bedroom, the crime scene investigator was photographing the scene. The position of the body indicated that Nigel had been shot while facing the shooter. This was strange for an accident while cleaning a gun. Detective Vasquez, the crime scene investigator called out to her. Something doesn't add up here. What exactly? The angle of the bullet entry. If he was cleaning the gun while sitting at the table or standing at the dresser, the bullet would have entered at a different angle. But here, everything indicates that he was shot by someone standing directly in front of him. Vasquez nodded. Her suspicions were confirmed. Meanwhile, news of Sergeant Coleman's death spread throughout the station. Lieutenant Whitman rushed to the scene as soon as he received the report. "Rita, tell me this was really an accident," he said to the detective. "It's too early to draw conclusions, Tom. But there are some inconsistencies." "What inconsistencies?" "Nigel was my friend. A good cop, a family man. Perhaps. But even good people can have secrets." Vasquez interviewed the neighbors. Mrs. Delmar from across the street said she heard shouting coming from the Coleman house shortly before the gunshot. Male and female voices, she specified. Very loud. Then the gunshot. This contradicted Monica's version of an accident. At midnight, Detective Vasquez finished her initial examination of the scene. Monica and the children were temporarily placed with Monica's parents, and the house was sealed off for further investigation. "What do you think?" Lieutenant Whitman asked as they stood by their cars on the street. "I think Sergeant Coleman was murdered, and I think his wife knows more about it than she's letting on." "Monica? That's impossible. I've known that family for 20 years. Tom, in 20 years on the job, I've learned one thing. You never know what a person is capable of when they're backed into a corner." In his prison cell, Marcus Jones lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He didn't know about Nigel's death. He didn't know that the man who had become a ray of light in the darkness for him would never come again. He thought about seeing Nigel again tomorrow, talking to him, maybe even touching his hand. These meetings were the only thing that made him believe in the possibility of a better future. Marcus had no idea that at that very moment, Detective Vasquez was looking through the prison visit logs, noting the suspicious frequency of Sergeant Coleman's visits to inmate Jones. "Every day for 2 weeks," she muttered. "That's not normal police work." Vasquez decided that first thing in the morning she would go to the prison to talk to Marcus Jones. Perhaps he knew something about Nigel Coleman's state of mind in the last days of his life. The Coleman house stood dark and empty, surrounded by police tape. Neighbors gathered in small groups on the street, whispering about the tragedy. A family that had seemed perfect had been destroyed overnight. The atmosphere at Monica's parents' house was heavy. The children slept in the guest rooms, still in shock from what had happened. Monica sat in the kitchen with her mother, silently sipping tea. "Darling, are you sure you told the police everything?" Mrs. Harris asked quietly. Monica looked at her mother. "Yes, Mom. I told them everything I needed to. But that was a lie." Monica hadn't told them about the poem, about her suspicions, about what she had seen in prison. And most importantly, she hadn't told them what had really happened in the bedroom. Detective Rita Vasquez arrived at the county jail at 9:30 a.m. on Friday with one goal in mind: to talk to Marcus Jones about his relationship with the late Sergeant Coleman. Prison records showed 13 visits in 2 weeks, which was highly unusual for a standard theft case. "Mr. Jones?" she called out to the inmate who was reading on his bunk. Marcus looked up, expecting to see Nigel, but instead, there was an unfamiliar woman in a business suit standing behind the bars. "Detective Vasquez, Chicago Police Department. I need to talk to you." "Where's Sergeant Coleman? We agreed to meet this morning." Vasquez sat down on a chair opposite the cell. "Mr. Jones, I have some sad news to tell you. Sergeant Coleman died last night." Marcus's face changed instantly. The book fell from his hands. What? How? Gunshot wound. We're investigating the circumstances. Marcus stood up and walked over to the bars, grabbing hold of them. This can't be true. I saw him yesterday. He was fine. What time did you see him yesterday? Around 5 in the evening. He brought me a new book. We talked about plans for the future. Vasquez took notes. What plans? Marcus fell silent, realizing he might say too much. My rehabilitation. He was helping me make a plan to quit drugs. Is that all? Marcus looked at the detective for a long time. What else should there be? Mr. Jones, the logs show that Sergeant Coleman visited you every day for the last 2 weeks. That's unusual for a standard theft case. What happened during those meetings? We talked. He was the only one who treated me like a human being, not a piece of trash. What did you talk about? Marcus sat down on the cot, wrapping his arms around his head. Nigel's death was like a bolt of lightning. About life, about books, about finding meaning in existence. Did Sergeant Coleman say anything about problems at home, about his wife, about depression? No, I mean, he mentioned that he felt lost, that he wasn't living his own life. Vasquez looked up from her notebook. What did he mean? Marcus realized he was at a crossroads. He could tell the truth about how Nigel felt, or he could protect his reputation. He said he always wanted to be a teacher, not a cop. That he sometimes regretted his choices. It was a half-truth, but Vasquez sensed that Marcus was hiding something. After talking to Marcus, the detective drove to the morgue, where a pathologist doctor, Chen, had finished his preliminary examination of Nigel Coleman's body. What can you tell me? Vasquez asked. 1 gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet passed through the heart. Death was almost instantaneous. The angle of entry? This is where it gets interesting. The bullet entered at an angle that indicates the shooter was about 5 feet away from the victim. That's strange for an accident while cleaning a gun. Gunpowder residue? Yes, but minimal. The shot was fired from a distance of more than 2 feet. Vasquez received further confirmation of her suspicions. She returned to the station and requested the Coleman family's phone records for the past month. The records showed that a week before her death, Monica had called Lieutenant Whitman several times to ask about her husband's work. There was also a call to the Prison Information Service asking about visiting hours. In the afternoon, Vasquez went to Monica's parents' house, where the family was temporarily staying. The children were at school, and she was able to talk to the widow alone. Mrs. Coleman, I want to clarify some details about last night's events, said the detective. Monica sat at the kitchen table, pale and exhausted. I've already told you everything. I know. But sometimes important details come up later, after the initial shock has passed. What details? You mentioned that your husband had been distant lately. Did you know about his frequent visits to Marcus Jones? Monica tensed slightly. He said he was working with an informant. Didn't that bother you? That he was spending so much time with one inmate? Nigel was a dedicated officer. If he thought it was important for his work, I trusted his judgment. Vasquez watched Monica's body language. The woman was tense, her answers sounded too rehearsed. Mrs. Coleman, yesterday at 3:20 p.m., a surveillance camera at the prison entrance recorded a woman who looked like you. Can you explain that? Monica paled even more. Yes, I was there. Why? I wanted to deliver something to an inmate. From his family, which family? And why through you and not through your husband? Monica realized she was tangled up in her own lies. I wanted to see the person who takes up so much of my husband's time. And what did you see? A long pause. Monica realized that the detective knew more than he was letting on. I saw that they were close. Closer than a police officer and a prisoner should be. How close? Nigel was holding his hand. Monica whispered. He looked at him the way he should only look at me. Vasquez nodded. The picture was starting to come into focus. And how did you feel when you saw that? Betrayed. Furious. My husband, the father of my children, was cheating on me with a man. With a criminal. What happened when he came home? Monica realized she couldn't lie anymore. The exhaustion of hiding the truth was unbearable. I confronted him. I showed him the poem I found in his pocket. He confessed. Confessed to what? That he was having an affair with this Marcus. That he was gay, and what happened then? Monica covered her face with her hands. I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted him to stop, to choose us, but you took the gun. I was furious. 20 years of my life ruined for a criminal. I demanded that he end the relationship and come back to his family. And he said he couldn't. That for the first time in his life, he felt alive. That he loved this man. Monica's voice trembled with pain and anger. And then you shot him? He tried to take the gun from me. We struggled. A shot rang out. Vasquez knew it was a lie. The angle of the bullet entry ruled out a struggle, but she gave Monica a chance to speak. Mrs. Coleman, the physical evidence contradicts your version. Your husband was shot from a distance. There was no struggle. Monica looked up, her eyes full of tears. He said he was leaving us. That he wanted to be with this man. That our marriage was a mistake. And you shot him. I couldn't let him destroy our family. The children need a father. I need a husband. And he wanted to throw it all away for a perversion. Vasquez saw in Monica's eyes not remorse, but justification for her actions. Monica Coleman, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder, said the detective, taking out her handcuffs. In prison, Marcus learned of Nigel's death from another inmate who had heard the news on the prison radio. He collapsed onto his bunk, feeling the world crumble around him. The man who had given him hope was dead. A week later, the preliminary hearing in Monica Coleman's case began. The prosecutor presented the evidence, physical evidence, neighbors' testimony about screams, prison records of Nigel's meetings with Marcus. The defense tried to portray the murder as a crime of passion, the act of a betrayed wife who discovered her husband's infidelity. But the prosecutor was relentless. A month later, Monica was found guilty of second-degree murder. The court took into account her psychological state and lack of a criminal record, sentencing her to 15 years in prison. After the trial, Vasquez met with Marcus, who had been released on parole for cooperating with the investigation and good behavior. In the prison where Monica was now being held, she refused to see a psychologist. She did not consider herself mentally ill. In her view, she was protecting her family from destruction. The story of Nigel Coleman, Monica, and Marcus became a warning about the price of lying to oneself and others. It showed how social prejudices can turn love into a weapon of destruction and fear of the truth into a source of tragedy.